Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm together with Martin,
Hello.
and we introduce you to our new series of bitzelbrews. So, Martin, what spice have you brought up for us today?
Today we are talking about 4-color Genesis Storm with Tymna and Thrasios at the command zone.
Sounds great. What is it about?
It's a 6-mana sorcery that has the ability Commander Storm from the Commander 2018 sets. And it basically copies like Storm, but instead of taking spells cast before the spell, it takes Commander cast. So Ben Hecklander, a good friend of us, came up with the idea to abuse Genesis Storm within a mostly non-land permanentless deck, and finishing with the combo that gets drawn by Genesis Storm.
Very well. So, how is this combo designed around that deck? How does it look like?
Genesis Storm says that for each copy, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land permanent. And since we only play a few of them, when we cast Genesis Storm, we will get all of those in play and finish the game that way. So Ben came up with the idea with a few of his pet cards. He wanted to play Bolus the Citadel and Aetherflux Reservoir to basically cast from the top of his deck and cast a spell with life and gain life back with Aetherflux Reservoir, and then exile lands with Necropotence.
Right.
And we came up with a few other combo lines. One we tried was Liliana Vess, Mana Severance, Bolus the Citadel, and Aetherflux Reservoir. So basically the same idea, but instead of exiling the lands with Aetherflux Reservoir, we put Mana Severance on top with Liliana Vess and then exile all the lands that way.
And Liliana is obviously the tutor on a permanent card, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Vampiric Tutor on top. And
yes. So,
then,
is there anything else?
Yeah, we tried a few other combo lines. The third one we came up with was Helm of Obedience, Rest in Peace, a pretty standard combo. And we also included Lotus Petal to play this combo without having any additional mana open, and then crack the Lotus Petal to activate Helm for 1. And then the final combo that we came up with, and the one I'm still currently playing, is Thoughtlash and Jace Wield of Mysteries. With Thoughtlash, you can exile your library, and with Jace Wheel of Mysteries, you can use the Labman effect he has to win the game with the plus that draws you a card.
All right. And about the efficiency, it's way better to play 2 slots instead of 3,
yes,
right? Because you need only 1 storm trigger, requires only 1 commander cast, but we'll probably cast more.
Yeah, it depends on the matchup, but we will come to that later.
Exactly. So how did you perform with that list so far?
So it went quite well. I won like 2 local tournaments, I think, or 1. And I was very close to top 8 in the 11th Prague DC tournament. And currently I'm playing the deck in the Duel Caster Mage League, so we will see how that turns out.
Very well. So let's get to the single card choices. Maybe you can tell us some very general things about your land base.
So in the land base, since we are trying to cast a 6-mana sorcery, we have to play quite a few of them. I'm going with 34 lands, 24 mana sources, and Maze of It. And we can also use that high land count to activate Thrasios a few more often than the usual Tymna Thrasios deck. And yes,
is there anything special aside Maze? I mean, you play Corehaven as well, right?
Yes, so I mean, you also playing Corehaven. That's basically the second Maze for me, and I can use the colorless mana to cast Genesis Storm to activate Thrasios. It's quite a nice land to use in this deck.
Okay, cool. So we see you're playing some ramp spells. Some people might not expect them.
Yeah, I think when you want to cast 6-mana sorceries and also tutor for them and draw a lot of cards with Thrasios, you kind of need a ramp. And since we can't play any signets or mana dogs, we have to rely on sorceries or instants for our land ramps. That's why I'm playing the classic forest ramp spells, 3 Visits and Nature's Lore to get additional forests out of my deck and into play. And then I'm also playing Growth Spiral and
Search for Tomorrow, I guess, right?
Search for Tomorrow, right?
Yeah, very nice.
To get additional lands quite fast into play.
Okay, so are there any other ramp spells you've tried so far that made the cut?
that didn't
recently?
make the
Or
cut. Yeah, I also
yeah.
tried Explore, which is basically a second growth spiral, but it wasn't worth it because it's kind of bad in the sequencing since you can't keep it up and also keep a counterspell up, and it's a really worse top deck compared to growth spiral when you don't have additional lands in your hand to drop. And then I also tried Farseek. Farseek wasn't really worth it since the lands come into play tapped. It fixes mana nicely, but that usually isn't an issue. But you want to play it like a Ram spell turn 3 and then keep a 2 mana counter spell open. It just isn't possible with Farseek.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, let's get to the cantrips real quick. So you play the very basic set: Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm, Serum Vision, also, and Impulse. I see.
Yeah.
There are two special cantrips, I would call them. Maybe you can tell something about them.
Yeah, I'm playing Latnam's Legacy and Sea Beyond. Probably the cards you don't see a lot of different other decks, but they are really necessary in this deck because if you draw one of your combo pieces, for example the Jace, you cannot just cast Genesis Storm and win. You have to cast Jace first and then cast Genesis Storm, so that's really cluunky. So you want to have a way to shuffle those cards back into your library and then draw different cards from it. And that's why I'm playing those two cards that allow me to shuffle back one card and then draw additional 2, which just filters those cards away. And also, of course, Brainstorm, which is a really great card to get those cards, get rid of those cards in your hand.
What about the other choices you could have made, like odd sleight of hands, stuff like this?
Yeah, I tried those cards, but they just didn't dig deep enough, and you usually want to find a specific card, like either additional lands or a tutor or an answer, and just looking at the top 2 cards or even top 1 just isn't worth it. And I also tried Think Twice, which would be quite obvious for this deck, but Think Twice is nice in decks that don't tap out turn 2 and turn 3, where you can just keep spells open and then play Counterspells or Think Twice. But in this deck, you usually play your commanders on those early turns, so Think Twice just isn't that great.
I see. Okay, how about your counterspell base? So, as the most decks you play, of course, counterspell, negate, 1 mana counterspells. Anything special about that? We see a cryptic command and a logic knot. Is there enough graveyard fuel for your logic knot?
Yeah, I think so. You have a lot of 2-drops and 1-drops that just go straight to the graveyard, and you don't play any permanents besides the combo, non-impermanents, so you just don't. Every card you play just goes to the graveyard, so you can fuel that one logic knot. And I'm not playing any other delve spells, so that makes that stuff even easier. Cryptic Command is just a great card. Like they say, if you have Cryptic Command in hand, you can't lose the game. And the combo deck that's just great, and you usually have 3 blue by turn 4, so it's really easy to cast in a deck, and it's a great card. The third, like a bit special counter spell I'm running is Dovin's Veto.
Yeah,
it's just an additional negate is pretty good in the current meta. I think you have a lot of non-land, non-creature spells that just are kind of annoying, and you can also protect your counters with Dovin's Veto, which is nice. It's just a good card, I think.
That's especially important if you're playing against another control deck. And
yes.
You're going for a counter fight to get through your Genesis Storm, right?
Right.
So this deck is not running Remand.
Yeah,
could be kind of obvious.
Yeah, it's a good card. It's, I think, in more tempo-based combo decks that can abuse the tempo advantage you gain by Remand, that card is really worth it. But in this deck, you're playing really grindy Magic usually, and then Remand just becomes kind of weak. You bounce that threat and then just play it again, and you didn't really get any advantage out of it, especially since you run more lands than your opponent. So drawing an additional land with Remand is kind of not worth it usually, and you're basically trading not 0 for 1, but like half a card for 1, which is not the place you want to be. I'm also not running Mystic Confluence, which would be kind of obvious in a ramp deck, but
this card seems kind of clunky as well.
Yeah, it is really clunky, and turn 5 is usually the setup turn, or the 5 mana turn, let's say it like that. Cryptic is nice. Turn 4, you're still like trying to keep the board even. You're playing board wipes, you're playing Cryptic Command. But turn 5, you usually want to play your tutor or play out your commanders to get your commander cards for the combo. And Mystic Confluence just feels mediocre in those turns.
continue with the board vibes or the way you handle aggressive decks. So you play 3 CMC4 vibes, correct, and Toxic Deluge.
I'm playing 4 CMC4 vibes. I'm playing Damnation, Wrath of God, Day of Judgment, and
Supreme Verdict, correct.
Supreme Verdict, and I'm also
4
playing
in total.
Deluge, so 5 board vibes in total.
Yes. The question which came up to me instantly was why you're not running balance.
So I'm playing all those board vibes to not have to play that many spot removal spells, and I can afford that because I'm usually just wasting my commanders as blockers, so I'm baiting my opponent into playing into my board vibes. And balance is kind of more a tempo-oriented spell, so you don't really get an advantage by playing balance on turn 2 with this deck. And also you're playing land ramp, and that way you almost always have more cards in your hand in the opponent since you're playing your commander in the early turns, and you also have more lands since you're ramping your lands. And that way balance becomes really bad in a lot of cases. It's a great card, but in this deck it's just you have a lot of non-synergies, and that way you have to cut it.
Also maybe because you're, like, depending on the matchup, early you will deploy Thrasios, for example.
Yes.
And then you won't get rid of all the creatures your opponent is playing, right?
Right.
Okay, so you also play the basic spot removals to deal with those decks. One recently entered Magic in general. I'm talking about Kaya's Guile, which is a very efficient spell. Obviously, you're running Swordstep Ploughshares and Fatal Push as well. How about permanent removal spells? You have Council's Judgment.
I'm only running the most efficient single creature removal spells, and Kaya's Guile because it's basically a free win against Red Deck wins, which is a pretty dominant deck in most tournaments. I'm also running Council's Judgment, Maelstrom Pulse, Unexpectedly Absent, Abrupt Decay to handle other permanents and also handle creatures against other decks, against like Saskia, for example. Those cards are pretty good, but I can handle the creatures with board vibes, so I want my other removal to hit everything and remove combo pieces or other problematic permanents like Pithy Needle.
Okay, I see. Is there anything, like, you're not really playing any CMC2 removal spells?
Yeah, cards like Go for the Throat that are kind of staple in controlling Duel Commander. I'm not running those cards. It's just not worth it. You don't want to like play single target creature removal and then draw a board vibe to just hit another one creature since you already moved all the other ones. And you're not really trying to like go ahead on board. So you usually don't have a board and then play single target creature removal to get ahead, but you're rather letting your opponent play into your board vibes, and that's why just playing more creature removal doesn't make a lot of sense outside of the most efficient one that gets rid of like dorks.
Of course, okay. But there is actually one CMC2 removal spell you're playing, mainly because it's very adaptive in terms of usage, so I'm talking about Collective Brutality.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the other hand disruption spells you're playing.
Yeah, I'm playing Duress, Inquisition, and Thoughtseize, which is the classic discard package. It's just a great way to spend your turn 1, and it's just good cards. You can get rid of interaction your opponent would have for your combo. You can protect your combo, and it's just a great way to get your turn 1 play away without just skipping that turn. And I'm also playing Collective Brutality, like you already said. It's a great card. It basically wins against red deck wins. It's good against control decks. It's good against mid-range decks. So it's a very flexible and great card. And cards I didn't consider regarding hand disruption was Mind Twist.
Yes, and that's something people could expect since you're playing ramp spells.
Yeah, same with Mystic Confluence, which would also be obvious. Playing ramp, so Mystic Confluence is easy to cast. Same with Mind Twist. But I think like most decks that play aggressive Magic kind of run under Mind Twist, even if I'm running Force Spell Ramp, which would give me like a Mind Twist for 3 on turn 3, which is quite nice. But usually most decks just have deployed so much stuff by then. I want to play my spells getting even on board and not just discarding the last 3 cards in their hand. It's good against control. If your meta is really control heavy, probably is worth it to play. But in the normal tournament meta, talking about ZAP or Prague or the German Duel tournament, like anything above 50 people, you're not good running Mind Twist.
I agree to that. And what I think very interesting is the thought about running Mind Twist against control decks, since they will probably trade in most cases for a counterspell, right? So the chance to actually hit
you
any
run
cards.
a lot of counters as well. So if your opponents plays like whatever 4 CMC commander they play and you get to Mind Twist their hand, it probably is worth it, even if they can stick to commander. And you have some sequences against control decks, and you also have sequences against slower mid-range decks, like those value kind of grindy piles that just aren't that aggressive. And those decks, against those decks, Mind Twist is also great.
All right. It's pretty important to search for your Genesis Storm actually. So the amount of tutors you're playing is pretty high.
Yeah, I'm running a lot of tutors. I have to, since drawing Genesis Storm naturally every game is not really a realistic thing.
That's true.
Since you also don't want to run your draw your combo pieces while searching for those cards. So I'm running Demonic Tutor, Personal Tutor, Besiege the Queen, Grim Tutor as basically unconditional tutors. Besiege the Queen isn't really unconditional, but usually you have enough lands to search it for 3 mana. Those cards are, I think, free includes. You always have to play them. And then I'm playing also a few non-must include tutors. One of them is long-term plannings.
That's a very exotic choice, actually.
Yeah, it's not the best card, let's say it like that, but I think it works quite well inside of the deck. You can always, like, example, if you have Thrasios in play and then you can play long-term plannings, activate Thrasios and then you draw your Genesis Storm next turn. And you can also just play it proactively in one of the early turns. If your opponent just doesn't play into your counterspell, you just play long-term plannings and you have a nice long-term plan to get Genesis Storm into your hand in 3 turns into the future.
Alright, so there are even more tutors you could play. It's like, I'm thinking about Diabolic Intent, since you're permanently trying to drop your commanders. And of course Thrasios can be used for mana sinks, but aside from that, you could also throw him into a Diabolic Intent, for example, right?
Yeah, I think Diabolic Intent, I tried that card for a bit, but I think against aggressive matchups, it's usually too slow. You use your commanders as blockers often, so you don't have a time to play creature and play Diabolic Intent. And it also becomes a lot worse when your opponent knows that you have the card in hand. For example, with a hand disruption spell, then they know you have the Diabolic Intent, and then they think a lot about removing your creatures, and then Diabolic Intent becomes a dead card in your hand, and they just basically 2-for-1 you that way.
Yes, exactly.
Other cards that I cut because of a similar thing is Ristic Tutor, for example. It's good if your opponent tap out a lot, but usually if you play like a 7-round tournament, you face 2 or 3 control decks, or at least 2, let's say it like that. And if those decks see that you have Ristic Tutor in your hand, you basically lose the game. Ristic Tutor is just a dead card from then on, and you can never play it. And it just feels really, really bad. So that card, it's good if your meta is all aggressive decks, but I don't think that's the case with any meta. Another card I'm actually playing is Intuition. You also need like ways to recur your combo if like Genesis Storm gets discarded, for example. So I can double dip on those slots. So I'm playing a pile of Noxious Revival, Mission Briefing, and Genesis Storm.
That's
that
spicy.
way, yeah, it's nice. That way, for example, if I cast Intuition turn 5 with 5 mana open, I can cast Intuition. If they play good magic, they give me Mission Briefing, and I can use Mission Briefing to put Noxious Revival on top. That way, I just win turn 6 if I have the lands for that. I can just use those slots to recur Genesis Storm once it gets discarded. I can use those slots outside of the Intuition pile, which makes it a lot better.
Okay, very well. Aside from the parts we've already mentioned, is there any other spells that would not fit those categories you thought about? Or
yeah,
anything, any
it's
special...
similar to board wipe, but I'm also playing Time Reinforcements. I think it's a underplayed card in Control. In this deck, it's great. It wins against basically every aggressive deck, puts you in front a lot of the times. You can use the tokens to draw cards with Terminal, and it gains you 6 life. I don't think you need any more arguments for that card.
That's true. Are there any other life gain spells you've tried?
I tried Blessed Alliance and Pulse of Muraza, but Pulse of Murasa mostly just isn't that great. You can only put lands back into your hands or your commanders if you let them go to the graveyard, but that's usually not the plan with the deck. And Blessed Lines was okay, but unless your meta is like 20 to 30% red deck wins, it just isn't worth it most of the time. But it's definitely a slot that's on like the top 10 maybe board slots.
Okay, but it probably shares this slot with other spells that are more
Right.
important or could be more important.
Right.
All right, so we're done with the single card choices. Let's head over to the strategy.
So with control, you have a great advantage. Most control decks play cards like Zor or Kess, so you can drop your commanders way earlier than them. And since both your commanders draw your card, they have to remove them. So most of the time, your sequencing goes whatever one drop you have into Thrasios, and then you have to see what they do. If they remove your Thrasios, you can just play a Ram spell, for example, or keep a counterspell open or stuff like that. And they wasted a card into that. And if they don't, you can just play Tymna and draw a card with that, and you gain free card advantage. You can also sometimes play Tymna into when they remove Thrasios, and you don't expect him to have like a blocker for Tymna or another interaction spell. But usually it's not worth it. You usually want to draw a card with Tymna once it comes down. So against aggro, you can do two things, I think. It depends a lot on your hand. Against a hand with a lot of board wipes, or at least one in hand, you can play your commanders, block with them, and basically bait your opponent into a board wipe. If you have like Thrasios and Tymna in play, and the opponent is red deck wins, and you can block the monkey from Curry every turn, and you can block a creature with Tymna, you're basically forcing them into playing more creatures. And if they do, you can play your board wipe, reset the board, and keep the counterspell ups for the next turns. If you have a lot of single target removal or cards like that remove permanents, you can also play your commanders out in an aggressive way. Maybe don't take the trade with Tymna and use the single target removal to get rid of those creatures and attack with Tymna Thrasios to gain life and draw cards. So that's usually the two things that work great against aggro and even mid-range. I think the matchup against aggro and mid-range is pretty similar. You just have to be more careful with your permanent removal, since they could play cards like Opposition that really destroy you, or Blood Moon.
Okay, very well. So, what general advice would you give for players out there who want to try out this deck?
I think one thing that's really important is, especially for like bigger tournaments where people don't expect you to play this deck, is that you can use a small trick and just role play as Aluren. Aluren is a really popular deck.
Playing the tap land turn 1.
Yeah, maybe that's not the way, but if you have like fetch lands turn 1 and you play the fetch land and you look really sad, and your opponent think, oh, maybe he just doesn't have one drop in his hand,
Very
but
well.
he has to keep the hand.
Have you done
like
that in Prague?
Yeah.
Nice.
And yeah, for example, I did that in one tournament against Red Deck Wins, and my opponent was confused for like 3 turns. And he still thought I had a really bad Alluring hand with just playing Commander turn 2 and Commander turn 3. And when he saw the Genesis Storm turn 7, I think, he was pretty surprised, let's say it like that. But it's one strategy that usually works, unless this deck, of course, pops off after this deck tech. And another advice against control, for example, you have to usually also use the advantage of your opponent not knowing what you're playing and go for one turn combo kill. So you use your tutor and your Genesis Storm in the same turn, so they can't really prepare for it because they still don't know what you're playing unless they play the hand disruption spell.
So would you claim that the win percentage of this list is actually lower if your opponent knows what you're playing? I mean, how much does that benefit the actual?
I think it's a small benefit, and you can still win those matchups if they know what you're playing. But I think if you have the advantage, just take it for free while it lasts. If people get to know this deck a bit more, it might go away. But currently, that's also not the reason to play this deck, but a nice little extra.
Okay, I see. I mean, actually, there are so many versions of Thrasios available, right? We've seen Reanimatorless, we've seen Luren, we've seen Control Shells, and we've seen, or now we see the Genesis Storm deck. So it's pretty versatile.
Yeah, it's the best two partners, and it fits a lot of strategies. Usually, Tymna Thras's control was kind of lacking a win con, since most great win cons in Duel Commander are red. So playing red cut is kind of bad for control usually, but with this combo you can just slot those cards and the tutors in there, and you never have to worry about a win con ever in your life again.
Okay, very nice. So is there anything else about particular sequencing or stuff like that you want to tell us?
Yeah, so I think one thing to keep in mind is using the reshuffled spells as late as possible, especially against controlish decks. Since when you brick with a combo piece in hand, we have like two choices. You can either tutor for a shuffling spell and shuffle it back and then draw Genesis Storm, which is really clunky but works better on counterspells. Or you can just hard assemble the combo, cast both pieces manually for 8 mana, and win that way. But that's usually you keep yourself open to sorcery speed interaction most of the time. You keep yourself open to counterspells, and that just isn't worth it. So I would rather just keep the shuffling spells in hand, maybe not waste them to shuffle away an additional land and just play it, and rather keep it open if you brick with the combo piece.
Have you ever experienced assembling the combo manually?
Yeah,
how does it look like? It seems to be very grindy, right?
Yeah, it happens like once every, I think, 20 or 25 games where you have the combo in your hand. And then I would rather cast Thoughtlash first most of the time, since Planeswalker interaction is way more present. And yeah, just go with Thoughtlash. In the first turn, maybe keep a counterspell open and then just cast the Jace next turn and win that way.
I see.
With counterspells open interaction, which is way better than just going for both pieces on one turn and then just lose to a random Assassin's Trophy.
Also, if you have both pieces in hand, Thoughtlash is actually a pretty good card against aggressive or mid-range threats that try to win with by fair ways or by combat damage, whatever, damage overall. And
yeah,
preventing it.
If you have like Thoughtlash in hand and you don't have the other piece but the tutor, you can usually get away with proactively casting your Thoughtlash, exiling a few cards, and stalling the game. And you will usually get away to find Jace. If you exile it, well, happens, bad luck, but usually you can get away with it. And it's a great card against aggro. You can basically stall the game for, I think, like 10 to 11 turns, just exiling cards each turn and drawing card with Thrasios. So yeah, it's not a great card to have in your hand, but it's fine. Let's say it like that.
That sounds like a different world of Magic, but
yeah, it's well, very different.
So what would you say is the most important color in that deck?
So yeah, since you play all 10 fetch lands, you usually have a lot of choices about your mana. If you think about the highest costs you have in your deck, you have a triple blue spell in your deck, you have a double white spell in your deck, you have a triple black spell in your deck, basically with the Siege to Queen, and you have a double green spell in your deck with Genesis Storm. So I think the first priority always should be to get the most blue, and then grind your way to the other colors. I think the second most important color is double white, since it enables all your mid-range slots. It enables Council's Judgment, Unexpectedly Absent, Wrath of God, and Day of Judgment, for example. So that should be your second priority. Your third priority should be getting the black spells ready, even the double black spells, since like your tutors are sometimes double black, and you want to cast them before you cast your combo. And then the third important thing is getting double green, but you usually want to have like triple green if you're playing your way ahead and be wasteland proof, since having your combo in hand but your opponent wastelanding your green source is the worst thing ever.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, very well. So we hope that our little deck tech has inspired you to run this Genesis Storm list. If you have any feedback regarding our deck tech, or if you have any questions for the deck, just hit it in the comments, let us know, and we wish you a great day, right?
Yeah, thank you for listening.
Exactly. Thank you. Ciao, ciao.